Do the protests and riots have a stated end goal? I guess it's just abolish the USA. You say, quote, the police should enforce the law, and I agree, but how exactly? What tactics would you use? Arrest everyone every night? Tear gas to disperse? Money to go home?
Yeah, it's a great question. And
Yeah,
in fact, it's one that I want to ask some of the people who are protesting. I want to ask that to the people who are most capable of answering it.
Dog chaos.
But let's say this. The nature of a riot is that there is a failure of the ability to enforce the law based on the immediacy, the suddenness, the fact of the force being overwhelmed, right? It's the same thing that creates looting, is that you have a force built for normal circumstances. When something abnormal of sufficient magnitude arises, the force is not adequate to do it. 2 months into a reliable riot, that's not where you are. Whatever resources need to be brought to bear on 2 blocks of Portland, is it possible to bring a force large enough to deal with lawbreakers in 2 blocks of Portland? Of course it is. So the fact that we're not doing it is not because it's impossible to figure out what those tactics might be. It's that there's no will to do it. And the no will to do it at the local level forces the feds to defend their buildings, which is then being portrayed as a fascist incursion, etc. And so, look, it's theater. It's theater with,
weapons.
With weapons. And so
weaponized theater.
Let's just not pretend that it's something else. This is a failure of the local, which is leaving the federal as the last line of defense. And it shouldn't surprise anybody that there's some level of federal enforcement to protect these buildings. That's where we are.
Yeah, and just to speak briefly to the first question in this question, do the protests or riots have a stated end goal? I haven't heard it. We've seen things like abolish USA and, and defund the police, which in some people's minds means end the police. But I will relay an anecdote that Nancy Rolliman, who lived here in Portland for 15 years and just moved away last year, but is back at the moment reporting for Reason, in one of her missives that is now published at Reason about what is going on here on the ground in Portland. She reports just a conversation with just a slight girl, really, like a young woman who probably weighs less than 100 pounds, who's sort of on the front lines at the federal building as the protesters are trying to get in. This is well after midnight. And Nancy hears her ask somewhat plaintively, what happens if we get in? and no one answers, right? And this, I think, is telling that if there is a stated end goal, it's not shared by even all of the people who are participating. And by which I don't mean they don't all agree, but most of them don't even know it.
So I would say the movement has an end goal, and it is the capture and wielding of power over resources. That is where it will cash out, for sure, right? The local phenomenon does not, the goal is happening. The goal is the ability to portray what is taking place as a fascist incursion into Portland that the New York Times will dutifully report as such. And this is that state. We've gotten there.
Yeah.